There we go. So we've started the recording for our TMN Tuesday February event. I'm going to start a live stream for our Facebook Live audience. So in just another minute and then we'll get started. And that is a bell here in town that tells me that it is lunch. It is 12 noon. Okay. There we are. Michelle, will you give me a thumbs up if you can see everything and everything looks like it's in the right spot?
Looks good.
All right. All right. Howdy, folks. Welcome to our TMN Tuesday February event. We're going to have a great panel of speakers and a video presentation on saving seeds for conservation, and then some great discussion afterwards. We're excited to have you guys here as part of this regular series that happens on the second Tuesday of every month. As we're getting started, as we always do with our TMN Tuesday events, I want to run through some of our tech background if this is your first TMN Tuesday that you're joining, and the WebEx isn't working exactly how you have participated in other webinar events. Don't worry, some of these features are intentional. So as an attendee, you are not able to unmute or share your video, but that is intentional as these webinars typically have over 1,000 or so participants. And I know that we had quite a few, quite close to 1,000 registered for today's event. So we're excited to have you all with us. But fear not, again, you cannot unmute or share your video, and that is on purpose. And I did see that there were a few folks having some audio issues with WebEx this morning. So if you're seeing my voice, or if you're seeing my mouth move, but you're not hearing my voice, then you'll want to take a quick screenshot of this and follow the instructions on this page. You can't hear me telling you to do that, but hopefully you can read the screen and see that it's telling you to go to the audio settings, make sure that your correct speaker is chosen, that the output volume is all the way up. Also make sure that your speakers are plugged in. We've had that issue in the past where somebody forgot to plug their speakers in. So I'm going to leave this here for just another second while we get those folks' audio fixed. And then I'm going to go into chat. So our chat is the other function that we're going to use today to communicate, is the function that we're going to use today to communicate with you as attendees. So feel free to use the chat to share your questions about today's presentation. This is where we're going to pull any additional questions for the participants at the very end of the presentation. We have some pre-submitted questions that we're going to use mid-presentation, and then at the very end we'll open it up for chat-based Q&A. In our chat, we ask that all discussions stay on topic, relevant, and professional and respectful. Please use full and clear sentences as well, as that'll help us as the moderators interpret the question that you're wanting to be asked to our panelists as well. And then to keep it as a big open conversation, please make sure that you are chatting to ... everyone, and that'll keep that chat in a public sphere so that we can all share in the enjoyment and the discussion on today's topic. If you are still having WebEx issues, we've got a call center line. I'm going to leave this up here for just a second so that you can take a quick screenshot of the phone number or go to that FAQ page on our website. Okay, gonna keep moving on. Hopefully you've grabbed that screenshot of that by now. So, Michelle, will you tell us a little bit about our Saving Seeds for Conservation webinar today?
Yeah, so this Saving Seeds for Conservation webinar happens to be a viewing and question and answer of a new product we have coming out of our program, and Saving Seeds for Conservation, our seed collections. Olivia Schmidt-Hahn is the creator of the video, and she's worked with a great team who you will see in the video from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center and the City of Austin. and Texas Parks and Wildlife. Anna, if you want to move forward to the next slide, we have the introduction, right? Oh, jumping around a little bit this morning. The Saving Seeds video, Saving Seeds for Conservation video today is part of our TMN Tuesday Advanced Training Series, webinar series for our Master Naturalist program. As a reminder, we're in the second month of our series for 2022. It's backed by popular demand this year. From 2021, we had a whole series of 12 months last year. 2022, this is our schedule for this year. It's the second Tuesday of every month. If you're a Master Naturalist, Texas Master Naturalist, you will be able to gain up to an hour or sometimes a little more of advanced training for these TMN Tuesdays from offered by the Texas Master Naturalist program. And interestingly, the Texas, our Master Naturalists can watch the recordings of these TMN Tuesdays for advanced training if you're not able to join us live during the event. Those will be posted on our website. The link there is right on the screen. You see it now there on the bottom left-hand side. And if you can scroll to the next slide.
It's thinking hard on it.
Yeah. Again, here is our schedule for 2022. And then I think on the a little bit of webinar etiquette for you today. We already mentioned that you're not able to unmute. As of last check, we had over 600 people registered for this session. That gets unwieldy if everybody's unmuted and talking. Use the chat function for on-topic discussion. Please keep your comments professional, respectful, and tied to the topic at hand today. The session, we anticipate this session running for about an hour. It could last a little longer depending on how much Q&A we have afterwards. We've already shared with you the WebEx help desk and content if you still need additional help. Next slide. And here's what I was looking for. For those of you who are watching this now and you want to go back to the recording later for anything that you may have forgotten or want to go back to, we will try to post our recording of this event, this live event, on our website by tomorrow morning. And this gives you a visual. This slide gives you a visual of where that is on our website. And so, introducing today, I mentioned Olivia. She is our outreach specialist with Texas Parks and Wildlife in our Wildlife Diversity Program. Olivia is the creator and mastermind behind the video, pulling it all together. Anna Strong is joining us. She is a botanist with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and really where the idea for the Saving Seeds video was born is with Anna. Minnette Marr is joining us from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. She's a conservation botanist there. And also Andrew McNeil-Marshall in his new position with the City of Austin as a biologist with the City of Austin, Austin Water, Wildland Conservation Division, Water Quality Protection Lands. That's a mouthful. But all three of these people, Anna, Minnette, and Andrew, are pictured in this video and lent a lot of resources and information for the development of the video. And there are experts here online today to talk to you about saving seeds for conservation. All right.
So Olivia, if you want to introduce the film, and then I'm going to give you the option to share now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Pearl and Michelle, for inviting this wonderful panel here today. Like you mentioned, I am the outreach specialist for the Wildlife Diversity Program with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And one of the main, aspects of my job is working with our biologists to develop videos on topics that they want to share with the public. So this is one of those videos, and Anna Strong, TPWD Botanist, came to me before the pandemic even was a thought in our mind, and proposed this idea of, what do we tell people when they see a plot of land being developed, and they want to save those plants and they want to save those seeds? Like, what kind of resources do we have to give them? And Anna came up with this brilliant idea to create a video for conservation purposes, to collect seeds and information about living collections, which we'll learn a little bit about in the video. And it's just been a joy to work with Anna and Minnette and Andrew throughout this process. And so I really hope you enjoy the short film. It's about 13 minutes long, so if you need to grab something to drink before we watch, that's how long it is. It's also available on YouTube in case it's a little glitchy on your end. I can provide the link in the chat to the YouTube video in case you'd like to watch it there or to share later. And yeah, I'm just excited for you to see it. We'll also be answering some questions after about the content, about seed collection and living collections, but also if you have any questions about filmmaking or any of the equipment that was used, feel free to drop those questions in the chat as well. So I'm going to start sharing my screen in about 1 minute.
Olivia, I'm not hearing sound yet. You might have to stay unmuted. And remember to click the optimize. You're muted now.
Okay, I think I've figured it out. Thank you, guys.
I don't think a lot of people think about seeds as living creatures, but that's exactly what they are. They encapsulate a future generation. That seed enables that plant population to persist beyond just that individual. Collecting and banking seed is important in the context of plant conservation because it essentially retains the genetic diversity of that population that you have collected from. The banking of seed can allow for future research to be conducted on that particular species. Banking that seed allows for reintroduction of populations that are destroyed. Populations can be destroyed through man-made causes or through natural catastrophes. But if we have a backup of that population in the form of the seed, then we can reintroduce that population back into the wild at some later point.
When we are making a seed collection for conservation purpose, we want to capture all of the genetic diversity. These seeds are going to be used at some point in the future, and we don't have control over the weather or even the soil. And so we hope that some of those seeds will have some resistance to whatever that adverse condition is. One of the species that was a target for me was Malvastrum aurantiacum, or commonly known as Wright's false mallow. That had been mentioned as a common species in the area about 80 years earlier. And when we started looking for that, we simply could not find it. And we could not purchase the seeds, they were not commercially available. And so for a long time, that stayed on my list of species to look for. So this species occurs in just a portion of Texas, 3 of the ecoregions, Texas Blackland Prairie, the Edwards Plateau, the Western Gulf Coastal Plain. In some years, those three regions experience really dry times. Most of the wildflowers will just go dormant. But the Wright's false mallow is one of the few species that is producing pollen in the driest time of the year. And so for those solitary bees that are collecting pollen, that can make the difference for them.
During the process of seed collection, you need to wait for seeds to mature in a population. You need to collect the seed, you need to clean the seed and then store it and retain all the information that goes along with that collection.
Once you have found a potential target that you would like to collect, you want to contact the landowner or the land manager and ask permission to come onto that site and to make the seed collection. That first trip, you're really just trying to get a sense of what species are at that site and the extent of the site. The next step is really to make sure that you know what your species is, that you have your correct identification, and that you know what its conservation status is. The conservation status will determine whether you collect those seeds by seed parent and store by seed parent, or whether you collect in bulk.
When you're collecting rare plants, you want to always retain the seeds from one individual together. Whereas for common species, you can take all the seeds and throw them into one bag. Additionally, when you're collecting rare plant seeds, if you know that the population will hopefully persist into the future, you want to facilitate the ability of that population to persist. So you don't want to collect very many seeds. The rule of thumb is collecting less than 10% of the seeds from a population in a year. Whereas for common species, you can collect many more than 10%. Unless you know that the rare plant population will be destroyed in the near future, and then you can collect more seed.
Ideally, we want to collect as many seeds as we can before the bulldozers arrive or whatever it is, but we still want to be able to keep those separate by seed parent, so we have to have some way to mark them. And so when the target is a rare species, you're going to flag each individual plant and you keep up with how many fruit you collect so that you will know those plants. The part that takes the longest is just monitoring the population. And so what I would try to do is like once a week be able to walk past it, check to see if it's still flowering. Once it stops flowering, you start kind of zeroing in on how long you think it'll be till it has mature fruit. It's hard to predict how long it will take from the time when you see those flowers to the time when you have mature fruit. It depends somewhat on the weather. I don't ever want to collect the first fruit, but I want to be there pretty quickly after that to start collecting. But I always want to let some seeds get back in the environment any given year. It's just a way to make sure that you're protecting the population and that you're collecting mature fruit when you actually collect. So what I usually do is I just kind of look at it quickly and see the fruit that looks the best. It should pull off really easily. If it doesn't pull off, then it's probably not good. We'll look and see that calyx doesn't have any small holes in it. Those seeds look good. That's it. It does not take any special equipment to make a seed collection. If you think about it, we have been collecting seeds for thousands and thousands of years. But you will have more success if you remember that those seeds are alive. And so you want to make sure that whatever you put the fruit into or the seeds into, that material, it allows air to circulate around the fruit and the seeds. After we have made that seed collection, we're going to process the seeds. We remove the insects and the frass. We really just want to store very clean seeds. We're going to store it for maybe a week or two over silica gel, and then we can put the seeds in some sort of waterproof container. It can be something as simple as a mason jar, and then we need a freezer. A standard household freezer is fine.
The vast majority of species can be seed banked. The process of seed banking, however, can kill some seeds. They become non-viable, and that's because seed banking requires refrigeration or freezing, and that dries out seeds. And that is a good thing for desiccation-tolerant seeds, but it is a very bad thing for species that are desiccation sensitive, where the process of cooling them dries them out to a point where they can no longer survive. And those species have to be conserved in a living collection.
A living collection is any curated, documented collection of plants. With proper documentation, any planting can be a living collection. We always knew we wanted to have a collection of the oak species of Texas. Oak seeds are acorns. They're large, fatty seeds. You can't dry that seed out to the extent that it needs to be dried out. The water in that seed will freeze, form ice crystals, and it will kill the embryo. In order to conserve them, we need to have a living collection of plants that will serve as a seed source for the future. You know, in 2015, I got some information from a colleague in West Texas that several oak species that I had been watching from afar were fruiting right then. In about 48 hours, I was out in West Texas to go collect these trees. We already had a permit established with Big Bend National Park. We were able to just go out there, make the collections over 3 days and come back. And that year we got about 11 oak species from West Texas. In some situations, we've gone to collect from 5 oak species and only one of those species has acorns. And so, you know, we do the best we can. We try to sample from that whole geographic range of that plant. You know, over the course of the trip, I try to keep them cool. We transport them back. They're each assigned individual collection numbers. Usually we'll put them in a little bit of moist sawdust, put them in the fridge, and hope to sow them fairly quickly after that collection. They don't all come up. Sometimes they do all come up. They die off in the nursery. They die off as young plants. We will keep as many plants from that collection as possible. We will grow them in the nursery for probably about 3 years. Each tree will be irrigated, mulched, and caged upon planting. And that gives them probably their best chance of survival.
The assumption is, what if we do have a die-off of all the oaks in Big Bend National Park? And so having backup, this is your backup. You can't have a seed bank, so you have a living collection.
Even a tree like a live oak, you know, we think of those as common, but, you know, we can't take these things for granted. What's common today may not be common 100 years from now.
In most of Texas, the rate of development is just very rapid. Even some of the plants that would have been very common here 50 years ago are becoming more and more uncommon. Ideally, we would be able to preserve enough habitat to have robust populations of these species. Sometimes that is just simply not possible. It's possible that the only way we can save that species is to seed bank it and hopefully restore the habitat or find similar habitat where the species can be grown out.
Collaboration is critical to our success in this work. There's no parameters for that. It's members of the public, it's other botanists from around the state and the country and the world, really.
Conserving plants in Texas is a team effort, and it is going to take many teams. because Texas is a big state. There are many native plants, but it is not impossible. If every group that is interested in native plants, whether it's a garden club or a butterfly club, if each one of them would take one species and make a seed collection this year to share with the members in their group and their local schools, we could make sure that many species that are endemic don't end up being species of greatest conservation need.
And honestly, just going out and exploring and documenting plant occurrences and populations on iNaturalist, learning about plants, what's rare, documenting those things, that adds to our knowledge of plants in our local communities.
The more we know about rare and common species in the state of Texas or in our own counties, the better prepared we can be to conserve and protect these species.
Okay. Thank you, Olivia, for the beautiful video. And I know some people in the chat asked about they might have had some jumpiness depending on their connection where they are. So we will share that video. It's the link has also already been shared in the chat, but we will link to it on our website. It's already on, I think, the Parks and Wildlife website and has been shared. And so we'll get that out there for you, in addition to having the recording available on our website, the recording of this webinar available on our website later tomorrow. So Olivia, we'll start off with a question for you. If there's any kind of background or information you wanted to give regarding the video that wasn't depicted through the showing today.
Yeah, well, some of the background, like I mentioned earlier, is that this was all Anna Strong's brainchild. So I'll let her talk mostly about how that came to be. And but when, after she had come to me, we had to decide, okay, how are we going to show this? How are we going to get all of this very detailed information into something that's digestible by the public? And so there's so much information, as we'll share later. There's pages and pages of resources on seed collection, but we wanted to make sure it was specific enough to Texas, and so we focused on Texas endemic species, Malvastra maranthiacum, and we used that as a model for this project. And so Minnette really helped us figure out where that was, where we could go film, at what time was it going to be flowering. She was collecting this for her own purposes, and we were just trying to tag along. And then, like I said, this happened all throughout the pandemic. So some of the planning happened pre-pandemic, then we had to adjust as things started kind of closing down and we weren't sure how much we were going to be able to film. So we really did a couple different segments of filming, some in late 2020 and then some in early 2021. And we were able to, get the shots of the living collection once the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center was kind of opened back up to allowing us to come out. They have a beautiful living oak collection there that Andrew showed us. And it was just beautiful to work on this. And since then, I've just been trying to put this video together, and it's been a lot of content to get into a consumable piece, but I think we did it. So.
Sorry, I jumped ahead there in asking you about the video, and I forgot that Anna has some content she wanted to share as a follow-up to the information that was shared in the video as well. So Anna, we can make you the presenter, and you can share that.
Thanks. Let's see if I can do it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my perspective on how the film came to be, mostly because most people don't know that my position actually focuses on exclusively rare plants of Texas. And so when Olivia and I were first discussing the project, I was always approaching it from the perspective of conservation of particularly rare plants. And it had already become clear to me through working with my coworkers that us, TPWD, Texas Parks and Wildlife, as a state agency, we just don't have the capacity to fund or to organize a concerted effort around the state to collect seed of rare species, especially when we find out about a development project beforehand that might impact a population. And so although this video doesn't attempt to solve the funding issues or create such an effort, it was definitely a step in the right direction. And so I just wanted to emphasize some of the reasons we collect seeds for conservation. They're here on the screen. And I mentioned this briefly in the video. We need to understand more about every species that we are trying to manage for rare species. And so we need to know more about environmental tolerances and reproductive biology, the genetics of populations in a species. All of this weighs into how we might conserve a species in the future. And also, of course, about it's a safeguard against extinction, having a backup collection. So when a particular population or a species goes extinct, we have a supply of seeds to do a reintroduction. And it also helps us determine germination and propagation protocols before a reintroduction even needs to occur. So some basic information about if you in particular would like to start a seed collection, there's a lot of things to consider before you go out and collect seeds. Some of those things are dealt with in the video. So how long a seed lives, can you seed bank it, depends on its desiccation tolerance. But then also things like when do you go start collecting? And that's going to depend on, of course, the flowering season. I can't go through all of these, but you should know the seeds per fruit, because then you know how many you need to collect. And this is also true for seed viability. Not every flower or fruit will produce viable seed, and you may not be able to know that until after you start collection, but it's something good to consider. Also good to consider is what kind of dispersal type does the species have? Is it passive? Does it just fall to the ground, or is it explosive? Do you need bags around those flowers and fruit before the seeds are dispersed onto the soil below? Much harder to collect in that case. And also what kind of size of fruit you have will indicate bag size that you need. And what kind of processing time will you need for cleaning that collection is indicated by a dry or fleshy fruit. Fleshy fruits usually take a lot more time and processing. And then what do you need? Well, really, you only need the first thing on this list, which is something to put the seeds in, a bag of some sort. Usually we use things that have air aeration, like paper or some sort of mesh. Then the rest of these things on this list are really just gravy. It depends on how committed you are, what type of seed collection you want to do. But you absolutely foremost need to have something to collect the species in. And then I'm going to pass it over to Minnette to talk a little bit more about processing collections.
Okay, so we have a lab here at the Wildflower Center, and most of the things in the lab you can also find, at home in your kitchen. So airtight containers, something like Pyrex, a mason jar or something like that. It does not have to be rigid. It can be flexible. You want some sort of breathable bag, as Anna said. If you use a Ziploc bag when those seeds are still moist, there's a very good chance you will end up with some moldy seeds. So whatever you use, try to make sure that they have air moving around them. Optional is desiccant, and you may use something like dried rice, or you may get silica gel. Silica gel is available at hobby stores. I got a bag of silica gel about 15 years ago, and I'm still using the same one. So you regenerate that in a microwave. It's not a big expense, but it can really extend the power of your seed collecting program. And then optional is to use a postage scale. When you are using some sort of desiccant to dry the seeds, you need to have sort of a way to measure what, so they'll be about the same. And so for silica gel, it's sort of a one-to-one thing. Ideally, that's by mass. I usually do it by volume. I always have, teaspoons and tablespoons around. If you're using dried rice, it's 5 parts of dried rice to 1 part of the seed collection. And so that just means that you really won't be, you'll be able to keep that seed collection and probably not lose it to mold. All right, next slide. All right, so processing common plant collections, if you're going to be sharing it soon, within the next month, at your next chapter meeting, or maybe with your local nursery or with your neighbors, you want to follow these steps. So after you remove the non-seed debris, you want to spread the seeds out in a single layer on a screen. If you don't have a screen, you can use a paper plate, you can use newspaper, you have all sorts of things. You just want to spread them out. And then you want to place that screen in a shady place with good ventilation. These just usually end up here at the Wildflower Center on our cabinets, just out of direct sun is the main thing. Then you want to place that screen in an airtight container at night. That's because as the temperature drops, you can get an increase in the relative humidity, and the seeds can then take moisture back on, and you really want to prevent that if you can. Our screens are too large for us to do that, so I use a really large Ziploc bag when that's important. And then you want to repeat that process until the seeds seem to be dry. Very often fresh seeds are going to be quite plump, and you can tell when they're getting dry. They've shrunk down some, and they will stop shrinking. If you're really dedicated, you can use that postage scale to weigh them. And once they stop losing weight, they're probably about as dry as you can get them in that manner. All right, next slide. And then if you're not going to shear them, say within a month or so, then you want to actually use some sort of desiccant to dry them out. So you're going to start with the same first steps that you started with, and then you are going to use desiccant in the bottom of that airtight container to remove additional moisture. And the first night that you do that, or the first day that you do that, you will be amazed. The desiccant will take on a lot of moisture. And so you'll put fresh desiccant, and then usually after about 2 or 3 times, the desiccant will not continue to absorb moisture from the seeds, and you've done as much as you can do. You have seeds now, if they're desiccation tolerant, that can be put in a freezer. And so if I would say that if you've not shared them by the end of this growing season or the end of the year, please consider redistributing them at the collecting site. They don't ever have a chance to germinate if they stay in the bottom of a refrigerator or the back of a drawer. All right, next slide. All right, and then for rare plant seed collections, if you don't feel confident in doing this, please contact me or contact Anna, and we will try to help you with that collection. We have helped people really from all over the state. One of the ways that they can do that is they can add pictures to iNaturalist. I can check those, and I can say, now is the time to make that collection. If at all possible, I'll come out and help you make the collection. And then you can transport them or mail them to the Wildflower Center. You remember, they need to stay cool if it's in the summer here. We will be offering a class on seed collections of rare and common species on March 19th at 10 a.m. It is not been posted on the calendar yet. It will be posted sometime probably the next week or 10 days, but that's a 2-hour class and we'll go into a lot more detail. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Minnette and Anna, for sharing that information. And I think that answered a lot of the questions that we got in the chat during the video. So that was a really clear description of the process and the tools. And a lot of the questions were if those slides are available for sharing on our website afterwards. And so we'll get those we'll get these slides and those links that y'all have shared with us on our website so that folks can refer back to them later, as well as they're building their collection of equipment and resources to get started. So, Michelle, there were some pre-submitted questions for our panelists. Would you kick us off with some of those questions as we get going through some of those, and then we'll collect more questions from our chat throughout this period as well to open up to all panelists at the very end.
Yeah, so the first question for Anna, and I'm going to combine your first question with one that we got in the chat too. So the question is, whom do I contact if I want to collect seeds from a rare plant? And maybe prior to answering that, there was a question in the chat about how do I find out where do I find a rare plants list?
Yeah, so like Minnette said, you can contact either myself or me, and we will provide our email addresses in a little bit. But if you want to talk about rare plants, definitely Minnette and I are your contacts. And then the other question was about the rare plants of Texas. We have a list that's called a Species of Greatest Conservation Need list. We have actually one for plants and animals. But there's a website, we can provide you a link that goes over, there's, a mere 440 species. So there's quite a few to choose from. Some are more rare than others. But yeah, talking to Minnette and I about these is probably your best bet.
And then following up on that, Anna, do I need a permit, or what kind of permission do I need to collect rare plant species, or if I want to collect common species on public versus private land?
Right, so you do definitely need permission to collect from any property other than your own. And I would suggest, as you start a seed collection, probably start with just property that's private, that you have permission to collect off of. Your friends, your family, folks in your community, somebody that you know that has private property is my suggestion initially. And partly because you do need permits and certainly permission to collect off of public lands, and they are varied. The type of permit dependent on the kind of species. Usually for the rare species, you'll need a permit, and you'll need dependent on the landowner. So any rare plant in Texas, you need one from Texas Parks and Wildlife, but then you will also need them from federal agencies if you're collecting off of federal property. So hence why I suggest you start with collecting off of private land. The permitting process can be long and arduous. And also, if you are collecting from public land and you happen to collect from the same population in the same year as somebody else in your community, and you do not know that you both are collecting that seed, you may collect more than that population can actually sustain for that 1 year. And so it's good to have an open line of communication about what is happening on all of these properties.
A follow-up question to that collection and permitting question. Someone asked if there was a formal network of
this is probably a better question for Minnette, but there is Center for Plant Conservation is the organization that I look to for any information on plant conservation. I don't know if the information about their seed banks nationally is available, but certainly organization by organization. So Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center is one of the institutions in the Center for Plant Conservation Network. And so I would just reach out to Minnette to start with if you have a particular question on a particular species.
So another question for you, Anna, that was submitted early was about the paperwork. Can you tell us a little bit more about why it's important to have paperwork for your collections? I know that there was some information shared in the PowerPoint about what you want to document and how that all happens and why that's so important for you.
Yeah, so basically any background on the population of the plants that the seeds that you collected from, or any studies that have been conducted on the seed collection itself since it was collected, that increases the value of the collection in regards to the ability to preserve that species into the future. And so the more we know about the seed, the more we know about the species. And so information like the habitat, the wild population of plants where the seeds were collected from, so numbers, distribution of plants, the location, any experiments that the seeds underwent since the time of collection, like germination protocols. All of this information allows us to know about where and how the plants thrive now and where and how they might thrive into the future. So detailed documentation essentially reduces their extinction risk in the wild.
Thank you. And so with all of that, and after watching the video, I'm sure that there are many master naturalists, Minnette, who are ready to get started and want to start their seed collection. So can you give us a brief summary of, I want to make a seed collection, what do I do to start?
All right, well, I would say if you've not collected seeds before, just make a collection of plants close to where you live, in your backyard, a vacant lot that's close by. Just sort of make that a goal to make a seed collection. 2 collections that I made in my backyard really early on were very easy to make. I could follow those plants. I could see that for one of them, I was going to have a problem with a flock of turkeys that my neighbor has. So I couldn't collect those in my front yard because the turkeys would be ahead of me on the seeds. Even if I got up there first thing in the morning with a cup of coffee, the turkeys were still ahead of me. But in the backyard, the turkeys weren't usually there, so I could make that seed collection. So I would say go with something that you can see just very, very quickly. You can check on them every day. And the 2 that I made were false dayflower, which is endemic to the Texas Hill Country. I think it goes maybe up, follows the limestone up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But that one, and then another one of my favorite ones was silver puff. And it gave me a good excuse to talk to my neighbors. They didn't even know they had these native plants in their yard. And so I could say, I'm going to probably be collecting seeds on Thursday afternoons. Would you mind if I came into your front yard and collected any fruit that were available? So it really gives you a chance to visit with people. That'd be the first thing. And then if you feel like you've been successful and those seeds appear to be good to you, I would suggest sharing them with either the Master Naturalist or your local Native Plant Society, or maybe a nursery that is in your area. And then move on and think, well, maybe the local nature preserve or a park or something like that, area like that, we could get those established. Once you have several of those collections underneath your belt, then you could target some rare species in your area. The list that Anna referred to can be accessed by county, and so that's a good way to narrow it down. So, if you're in Hayes County, you're not looking for some plant that is rare in Harris County. So there are lots of ways to narrow that down.
And then Michelle, I know that you've got some questions, but I have one more from Minnette. As you're getting started with your seed collection, how do I decide what to start with, wildflowers or grasses?
It just depends what you would like to do. I think that they both present different challenges. I think if I had never made a seed collection first, I would start probably with the wildflower, and start with the wildflower that has many seeds per fruit. It can be pretty discouraging if you just have one seed per fruit, or in the case of the salvias, only 4 per fruit, and it's really hard to get that timing right. So something, I don't know, but there are a lot of things that are around, and you can tell pretty easily, like the malvastrum. It's easy to see the fruit. It's easy to see if you have holes in the fruit. If you have holes in the fruit, you want to just walk away from it, because somebody else has got there before you have. Yeah.
And before we move on, Minette, there is one burning question everybody is asking in the chat about the workshop that's being planned for March 19th. Will that be online? Will it be available
Yeah,
online?
that will be online. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there an online and in-person option, or is it entirely online?
I believe it is. This one is going to be entirely online, and we would certainly hope in the future to offer, a class here in person, so that you could get actual experience. But right now, it's online. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we're going to move on to Andrew for a minute and ask one of the questions that were sent in early. Andrew, what species are desiccation sensitive? How do you know that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a link posted into the chat earlier about that maybe it was a link of orthodox species, or I'm not sure if that got out there. I mean, it can be hard to determine. Typically I think desiccation sensitive species are those seeds that have like a fattier content to them. I mean, and that's why, they can't be dehydrated to the point where they can be frozen without killing the seed. That's kind of the issue there. There's a lot of tree species that are in that group. Pecans, walnuts, magnolias are in that group. The big focus at the Wildflower Center are the oaks, because oaks are such an important plant group in Texas, and those seeds are desiccation intolerant. So we chose to focus on that plant group specifically. And then you have a plant like the coffee plant that, is also an exceptional species in that it cannot be seed banked. But, I did a little research on this. It actually appears that it's not the desiccation that is the problem. It's the freezing temperature. So I'm not sure what the mechanism is for that in that seed, but that's just another example of something in between desiccation intolerant and orthodox, like we've been talking about.
And then following up on that, Andrew, a lot of the questions that were coming in during the video was about starting a living collection and what the process is for getting a living collection started. How many seeds do you need, or how many different plants do you need as you are building, not seeds, plants do you need as you're building your living collection?
Yeah, and I think an important distinction to be made is that we're working with conservation collections, collections that have a conservation value. So, all of our plant collections at the Wildflower Center our living collections, but you know, the collections with conservation values are curated to perform that function. So you know, at the Wildflower Center, we collaborate with several other public gardens around the country to, you know, you can think of that collection existing. It's a multi-site collection. You know, there will be some in California, there are some here, maybe some in Chicago, for example. And so, you know, our collection at the Wildflower Center, we would hope to have, you know, maybe 20 distinct individuals, hopefully representing the genetic range of that species. I mean, that can be thought of to be a geographic range, but there are probably other genetic elements that we would hope to represent in that species. Site differences. And then in that whole collection nationwide, you know, we would hope to maybe have 100 plants or more in that multi-site collection. Again, you know, I think the quality of the collection in that it represents the genetic range of that species is more important than the quantity of plants that you have. And one thing about the multi-site element of that collection, which we may touch on in another question, is that you know, it helps protect that large collection of plants, in that if, God forbid, a wildfire hit the Wildflower Center, you know, or something, or a tornado or something, you know, that collection is represented in a number of collections around the country.
So with that, Andrew, is a living collection attainable in my backyard? Is there value in creating a living collection in my own backyard or in my own private space that I have?
You know, the hard answer is no. The kind of collections that we're talking about at the Wildflower Center that have that conservation value, you know, one really important element of that is that those collections are protected. You know, that is one stipulation of joining these multi-site collection groups, is that, you know, that your organization will value that collection and will protect it over the long term, especially in terms of oak trees. You know, those are very long-lived species. And so, you know, a homeowner can't necessarily guarantee that. You know, and a nicer, easier answer is, if, you know, as Anna talked about earlier, if you keep meticulous records and you can demonstrate to me that this group of plants in your home garden, you know, maybe you have a large botanic garden at your house. I know individuals who have that. I mean, maybe there can be some conservation value there, but for the most part, I think it would be hard for an individual to have this kind of collection.
But there's still value in helping to work and partner with organizations like Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center to help pull some of these collections together, or provide resources for those collections as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in any number of ways, supporting the organization being one way. But, you know, I mean, in my time at the Wildflower Center, we had a strong core of volunteers that helped us, you know, plant those trees, establish that collection, working in the nursery, stuff like that. So for sure, there is a lot of potential for citizen involvement.
Excellent. Michelle, we've got just a few minutes until 1 o'clock, but I certainly don't want to leave Olivia out with some of these pre-collected questions. Olivia, we had a number of questions come in early on with this webinar about your equipment that you used for capturing some of those incredible shots, both the overhead and the very micro, is it micro or macro shots with the insects on the flowers. Can you explain a little bit about your process, the equipment that you used, and then also the kind of the whole timeline of that production? And you explained a little bit earlier, but some more.
Yes, I'd love to. I've actually pulled up, let me share my screen because I've pulled up a few of the items that I've used to film that I wanted to mention. So a lot of the macro shots of seeds that we saw throughout the piece, those were done at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center Seed Lab. And this was a priceless piece of equipment, this PhotoDiox LED studio in a box. Basically, it's this pretty big, maybe 2-foot squared box that lights up from the inside, and it has different, ports of entry where you can stick a lens. And this is where we would put the seeds inside, and I'll show you the lens that I use to get macro shots. So any macro lens will work. Macro just means that you're getting very close up to your subject. You don't necessarily physically have to get close up to that subject, but the frame of reference is very close. You get a lot of detail. And so this particular lens is called the Laowa probe lens. And as you can see, it looks like almost like a shotgun barrel, and you're able to get very, very close up to your subjects. It actually has an LED ring of lights around the very tip of the lens, which gives you more light and allows you to have a faster shutter speed for some of your photos, if that's what you're doing. So you're able to get these really close-up detailed shots of whatever you're interested in: insects, the details of seeds, the details of leaves. I know a friend who actually stuck this lens inside of an anthill once to get some footage of fire ants. I've stuck it up into cracks in bridges to get Mexican free-tailed bat footage. This is a very cool lens if you are interested in macro photography or videography. And then the drone is the Mavic 2 Pro. This is a really affordable, great little drone. And that's what I use to get a lot of the aerial shots. And then this is my camera body, which is the GH5S, the Panasonic GH5S. And it's a great little camera for videography if anyone is interested in exploring that. And then here is the Zhiyun crane. This is really great if you're just out in the field and you're trying to collect footage of people in action. It's a stabilizer, so you can place your camera on this piece of equipment and it will make the motion more smooth. Even if you trip or hit a bump, it makes it so that your motion is smoothed out. So I followed Andrew and I followed Minnette around in the field with this piece of equipment. And then really quickly, you had mentioned the animations as well. I used an iPad to do some of those little animations, and particularly this app called Procreate, which is wonderful. If you're interested in art or animation, communicating science and wildlife topics through your art, Procreate is an amazing tool for that. So I just wanted to share those. And now I've forgotten the second half of your question, but that was a little run through.
The production timeline, you talked about production timeline earlier, but the process for pulling all of these pieces together, especially during a pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken since 2019. So it ended up being a good year and a half of production, and then year or so of post-production, just because I had to do other projects at that same time. Get the pieces together that we really wanted to communicate, because we have a lot more footage, that we didn't get to use as well.
So I have one final question for you, Olivia, and then Michelle, I think, has been working to collect some of the chat questions, and we'll get to those. I do realize that we're after 1 o'clock, and thank you all of our panelists for sticking with us as you can. I know Minnette needed to jump for just a little bit. But Olivia, as you were going through and talking about the process and the extent to which all of this had to be pulled together, and the the perseverance through COVID that it took to put all of these parts together. Why is it so important that we create, or folks like you have the skills and the expertise? Why is it important to create conservation videos like this, or what's the value in these outreach messages through video and art?
That's a really good question. I have thought about this for so long because, I am a trained ecologist and I understand the value of the science, in itself, its inherent value. But if people don't know about it and they don't know the details, they don't know that world that we inhabit, then they're not going to, invest in it. They're not going to care about it. So I really feel like showing people both the visual beauty of seeds and flowers and the process and these people that are doing this incredible work, it just, I hope it makes people fall in love with the whole process and makes them want to get involved, either by supporting it financially or by getting their hands dirty and go making a seed collection as well, because we really desperately need it. So I'm grateful to be able to work on projects that really matter and where we're able to convey it in a beautiful way that hopefully inspires people. So thank you.
Well, thank you for putting gorgeous videos like this out. We really appreciate that. And we will be sharing the YouTube link on our website and our social media as well, so folks have a chance to watch it a second, third, or fourth time if they need to, if they want to. Michelle, are there some questions that have come in chat that we can ask our panelists if y'all are willing to stick around for another 10 minutes or so?
There are a couple of questions. So we had a couple questions come in about whether or not the seeds always stay true to the species, or asked a little bit differently in the chat, how do you know that in response to about an oak, how do you know that acorns you collect will produce trees with the same genetics as the parent?
Yeah, no, that's a complicated question, which is good. And, there's kind of two parts to that. I think, it's hard to know, and that's part of collecting from the whole range of a population of the species. I think these days it's a little harder or it's a little easier to understand the genetic range of different species and how one sample might fit into that. And so, I think that the collections that I did at the Wildflower Center, I didn't always have the luxury of parsing that out. I had a limited number of seeds. We grew them all. We put them in the collection, and some of this stuff can be determined further down the line. The other question that brings up is how do you use those plants for conservation later, in that, you would imagine taking seeds off those plants and planting them out for conservation in the field. The same thing applies if you have a collection of oak trees, from around the state of Texas. How will you ever know what your conservation species have been pollinated with? And so probably you would do some very controlled pollination in a number of ways. There are ways to treat that in the future that probably get a little bit in the weeds, but the short answer is that it's nearly impossible to determine that. Sometimes you can tell, from the morphology of the appearance of the small plant when it grows, but it's a complicated question.
Okay, maybe this one might be a little less complicated. There is one question in the chat that came in, and it asked if you could define one unit of seed.
I saw that question. I don't know, Anna, is that you?
Yeah, this is the Minnette. The Minnette was supposed to answer that question. So basically, well, in my mind, I would say, is there one embryo and that should indicate number of seeds, but it actually is really can be very difficult to know the difference between a fruit and a seed. And that is one of the reasons that I encourage y'all to do your homework about a particular species. And, in that sense, you may have to go learn a little bit more about botanical terminology, but it is not always obvious. Is that the question? The answer to the question that's non-committal enough?
No, I mean, the answer is you really have to know your stuff and do your research. And you made a great point about seed versus fruit as well, too. We've got a few questions from the chat that were asking about different places they could share their efforts, or if they are collecting, where else can they share with? We've had some responses about sharing with neighbors, contacting the Wildflower Center, and seeing if collections could be shared there. Are there any other networks or resources you might offer to this group and those people asking those questions?
Yeah, so it just depends on the species, honestly. And it also depends on how you collect. So if it's a rare plant, we want you to collect in a very specific way. If it's a common species, I would suggest still that you share it with somebody in your own area, because, a lot of the commercially developed wildflowers that are readily available were historically created from a population, let's say it's a widespread species from Virginia to Texas. Somebody went out, collected from one population in Alabama and shared it all over the eastern United States. And so that's less than ideal in a lot of ways. We would prefer these days for different areas of collected to be collected from. So more than one population across the eastern United States. We want several collections within the state of Texas to be collected from. And so that geography, the reason this is important is that geography will inform who you share something with. And so we, being conservation minded, would encourage you to share with groups within sort of your ecoregion, within your county, within your larger county area. But in terms of who specifically to share it with, we have less information. There are restoration efforts that may be going on in your local community. And the only way to know that is to start asking around. And unfortunately, that's going to be very geography dependent, area dependent.
Maybe I'll jump in and say, I think local nurseries may be interested. The folks at the Wildflower Center would probably always take certain seeds, and, working with the Wildland Conservation Division now for the city of Austin, I mean, we do a lot of seed-based restoration work, and, it speaks to Anna's point about, knowing your local organizations and who's doing that work. I think that's a big one.
And staying connected as a master naturalist.
There was a couple more questions actually, but I know we're getting close on time. Olivia, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you the last question to kind of close the loop on the gorgeous video that you shared. Some of the questions that have come in recently for you and Chad have been about what can folks do to share the video that you've created, and translating some of these materials for different communities to be able to educate with themselves with this video. Can you tell a little bit about the plan for the rollout of this video?
Well, the video is now up on YouTube. I think that's one of the easiest ways to share is to just grab the YouTube link, which has already been shared in the chat, but we'll send out again. And it's so easy to, even just email or text that link to a family member, a friend, a community member who may be interested in creating seed collections, or to local groups. Like Minnette mentioned in the video, like birding groups, butterfly groups, anyone who cares about the land in some way or cares about wildlife that use the land. it would benefit them to see this. Also, I think it would be great for people to, if they're doing a presentation, the master naturalists say are doing a presentation about restoration or about anything related to plants or seeds. I think it's a great way to start off the conversation or to include it in resources. So you guys are such a wonderful network. I don't even know the extent to like who you all are connected with. So I just ask that you think about who you would like to see this, who would benefit from seeing it, who's eager to, get to work and get their hands dirty and making some seed collections. And I did notice the question too about making it, translating it, making it available possibly in Spanish or for disadvantaged communities. We don't have plans to do that, but we do have some staff who could possibly translate it. I think that would be really wonderful. So thank you for mentioning that, and I'll pursue that.
Or Master Naturalist can help with that.
The first person I'm going to share it with is going to be my neighbor. As Anna was talking about earlier, just across the fence, sharing these resources with your neighbors and your community is a great way to build that connection as well.
I think it's a wonderful place to start.
Yep. So thank you guys so much. Michelle, do you have any final questions, or do you think we can let them go?
Thank you to the group for coming together and putting this together so quickly. And it's been a great hot topic. Everyone's enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop the sharing, but again, we'll have this recording and we'll have the slides and all of the resources mentioned on our website by first thing tomorrow morning.